Get.
What?
Get.
Good.
Get.
What is gonna? I can't believe it.
Were you about to tell me something important right before I
I was
live?
very important. I was like, whatever you do, don't you dare interrupt me. What? What? Hey.
Oh. Oh man, here we are again.
Oh, hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey.
G-
What?
Okay. At least one
Sound
DJ.
effects.
At least one DJ air horn per day. I think that's the doctor said. No more than that. It can get a little bit bad for your ears, you know?
Yeah. It's I don't know. It just really gets me spirited in the morning, you know, just after the raves last night, the Monday night raves. You know how
Yes.
it is out in the suburbs.
You know, that's one thing people are saying about Princeton, Texas.
I know. The town of 5,000 has the best raves.
Although, to be fair, there are plenty of great fields that raves could be had in.
Yeah, you're just raving with cows. You're raving mad.
You heard it here
mad
first.
cow disease.
Ryder has built a shed in his backyard so we can host a rave for you guys.
Yeah, if y'all want to come over, I mean, rave on, buddy. It's
Yeah,
like,
I mean, he laughs,
Buddy
but
Holly,
when I
guess,
tell
is
him
a
that our
rave on
ticket price is
reference.
$5,000 a head,
Yes, please invite your friends.
I'll tolerate pretty much anything for $5,000 a head.
I know.
I can even bribe off the cops. You know, we can do all
Yeah,
sorts of things.
and it costs more for the rest of your body. $5,000 a head.
Yeah,
Another 10 grand for the rest of your body to show up.
That's good. Well, good morning. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing good, man. Got some stuff done at in the shed yesterday.
The shed.
I got my crimpers.
The heat shed?
The heat, yes, the heat shed. Oh.
The crimpers that you so affectionately described for us.
Yeah, like that I went on and on about yesterday. Yeah,
I like it.
I got those.
Well,
they
you know,
work.
just for those who are curious, Ryder is like, some people like to screw. Not me.
I crimp.
I crimp. Crimping ain't easy, baby. It is with this tool, though.
No, it is. Just a little bit of leverage, and you back off of it a smidge.
Well, that's good. So you joined some metal.
I did. I very,
Did it have a purpose, or was it just like, I got to try this thing out? Where's my scrap
No,
metal?
it was great. Like, there was no screws, and so when I put the sheetrock on top of the metal studs, I'm not going to be bumping into the screw heads poking out. So I'll get a more flush mount with this crimper. So that's why I did it.
You heard it here second. His new album coming out next week, bumping into the screw heads.
That probably should be the band name, something like that.
or
The
is that like a
Screwheads.
week going to visit the in-laws?
Rider and the Screwheads.
Bumping into the Screwheads.
No, we're not gonna put screw in any
Anywhere
context
near
with
the
the
in-laws.
in-laws.
Okay, all right. We're in Texas after all, not Arkansas or one of those other places, right? Well, yesterday was a great day, wasn't it? It was Monday.
Yeah. Mondays are always the best. They're known for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what M stands for, is marvelous. The best.
I think it stands for.
It stands for. Where was he going with that one?
Yeah. I think it stands for meetings for me.
Yeah.
Meetings Mondays. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I
Sounds
just
like so
line
much
them all up and just stare blankly at the webcam the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they? Well, that's heads only. So that would be a cheap party for them.
Yeah.
$5,000 only for the head.
Look at all the heads.
So yesterday we talked a little bit about marketing, and we got a little meta, to use another M word while we're talking about Monday alliteration. But we talked a little bit about what that means for us as a company and what the difference is between creating something and marketing something.
And we kind of went down a lot of different paths of what people consider and think about with marketing, social media, the creation of the project. Reed talked about creating in the cave versus this kind of newer style of sort of tantalizing and teasing people as you create it, so you build the audience when your product arrives. And
you even shared your cave pics. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, if you can get a signal in there. Yeah, in the bat cave.
Yes, and we talked about social media. We talked about affiliate marketing, what that is, and hey, actually we do it, and talked about the good things that can happen with that, and also alluded to, hey, some people use affiliate marketing for the wrong ways. We talked very briefly about the influencer type of thing, where maybe they're shilling some things they're not fully behind. What else comes to mind for you?
Brought up some quotes of people. A lot of them were saying you need to know the path before you start really getting into it. You need to know why somebody's clicking the buy button.
I can't show you the way if you don't know the way.
You don't know, yes. But there's a big issue with not knowing where you're going, right? And not understanding why you're putting the product out there. People have so many options now. They can buy anything. So the real issue is, why are they buying from you and why now? And that means it's part of your story. We talked about this integration of biography into the product as well.
Yes, that we did. And we also talked about the concept of super fans and the idea that, hey, you don't need millions or even hundreds of thousands of people to buy into your thing. You sometimes just need. We introduced the concept of 1,000 true fans, which was by
Kevin Kelly.
Kelly. And that's the idea of like, hey, if you get 1,000 people who are truly fans of your company or you and what you're doing, and you get $100 from them in a year, that's $100,000 right there. That's a start to a solid business, or potentially what's called a lifestyle business.
Yeah, no, it's a great business. I'm making $100,000 a year, just being professionally you. That's the dream.
Yeah, and for those who are curious what that lifestyle business means, a lifestyle business is a business that supports you and your lifestyle, but not much more. And so for a lot of people, $100,000 would do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So that is, I think, enough of it. Oh, we also, there was a very wise, Socrates, Aristotle. I think it was him who said about the trash building up in the pipe until the final trash explosion. I think he used the term sewage, back in his day.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And
Yes. If you're wondering what the heck we're talking about, that was the analogy I somehow came up with on the spot to describe all of the work that happens behind the scenes and build everything up into that one day where you'll eventually become an overnight success.
Yeah, you can spread your sewage across the entire planet.
Right. Because you're like, I wish my sewage was everywhere. And you're like, I can't get it there. But then when you build up the pressure behind the pipe, it allows for optimal spewage. It gets that further distance. It gets that better spread.
Sewage spewage.
Sewage spewage.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, if you're like, what the heck are these guys talking about? Sorry. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. Go to yesterday's episode to learn a little bit more. But with that, let's jump to the intro. Helpful for life. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. Today is January 25th, Tuesday, 2022. I mean, that'll be satisfying this year. Tuesday, 2022. Although audio engineers everywhere are like, stop
Yeah,
saying
that's
that.
what I was just. I know.
And then Sally on Sunday with the
Saturdays.
seashores and yes, but
Yep.
I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life,
This is Ryder Richards.
and this is What the Hell is Water, a weekday morning show to entertain you, make you question things, make you question us.
Yeah, that's gonna happen no matter what.
Yeah,
It's
and
just-
hopefully smile and laugh a little bit, and leave you with one positive thing every day to take some action. Which I didn't recap it, so this should have gone before the intro. But oh well. The challenge from yesterday was kind of a two-tiered challenge. You could do one, both, or those are your only options. You can't do neither. Not allowed. But the first part was what are you doing for your personal marketing? And one of the easy steps we said was, hey, you can go create a personal website. Like, it's so easy to do. Anybody can do it now. There's so many tools called what you see is what you get editors. You just click stuff, drag it around, resize it, things like
and
that.
they do most of the hard work for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little trickier setting it up on your own, but a lot of these companies will take care of all the tricky steps.
Yeah. And so by having your own personal website, you control your brand. And when someone looks you up, say they're trying to find out who you are because they're dating you, or maybe you're trying to get a job, I didn't think about that angle yesterday, but if someone's trying to date you and they Google your name and they come up with a personal website that you control how they look, I think that's a pretty good way to like up your chances a little bit.
If you make it look enough like Wikipedia, make yourself look really good.
Include your entire dating and
Yeah.
sexual history on there.
Maybe it's more like you're a philanthropist who was nominated for the Nobel Prize.
It depends on the type of person you're trying to attack.
Yeah, I guess it does, right?
Yeah. No, but you could go with like a mockumentary type of thing and
Yeah.
make yourself sound really cool. But yeah, so one branch of that challenge was, what are you doing for personal marketing, with the suggestion of maybe doing a website. And if a website's too much, well, maybe you could at least revamp your public profiles that you have, like LinkedIn, social media, various things like that. And the other aspect that we talked about was to help us out, helpful for life, help you by helping us, helping you.
There's so much help in there.
There is a lot of help in
Please.
there. And the way that we asked them to help us yesterday, I'm completely blanking on, but at the very least it was...
Oh, a lot of it was word of mouth. We were talking about that at some point. I think we talked about sharing. And
Yes.
man, if y'all can share that, share feedback with us, but of course sharing our episodes really helps.
Yes, share our episode, share part of our episode. You can send a link to somebody, especially if you're on a computer. You can say, hey, start it at 5 minutes and 34 seconds. That's where that dude talks about that trash pile. The
It's
trash
good
pipe.
part.
Yeah. All right. So with that recap now all taken care of, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about today. So today we have a special guest who's a friend of mine, and we actually met in college in back down at Texas A&M. And now Danielle and I were sitting on the couch last night, and we were talking with a friend, and we were like, next year we'll be married 10 years. Which is kind of weird to say, and it makes me feel old. And then I was like, that also means I've been out of college
I think it's
for 10
illegal
years.
for kids at the age of 10 to get married.
I know, right?
That's so
It is.
strange.
It is.
Huh.
But that's the thing about birth babies. Birth marriages. It's just, when you come out married, it's like...
it was okay. I
Yeah.
guess this is it.
and we've been making it work ever since.
Oh wow, that's so
But yeah, so the
heartwarming.
point of that was that it's been 10 years since I got out of college. Graduated in 2013, and so I met Justin, who's our guest, in college, and so now I've known him for over 10 years. So it's been a real joy to watch him as he's developed and his life has gone along, and it's been really interesting too to hear more about his background and all the things that have happened in his life, and how the things he's putting into his life today to help set up his life for the most success possible. And so I thought it would be a great idea to have him on to talk about some of these things. And so that's what led us to our topic for today, which is becoming better. And specifically, some things around overcoming mental health and past trauma issues. But we'll also get into some other things about potentially some toxic masculinity, definitely some talk about therapy, maybe some talk about drugs, but there's a lot of possibilities. So with that, we should probably go ahead and hop over to our guest. So here we have Justin Corneau. Hey, Justin. Good morning.
Good morning. How's it going?
It is going well. Thanks for joining us, especially because you are, all the way over in that Denver time zone, so you're a whole hour behind. So you got up nice and early just for us. Appreciate that.
I did, yeah. Yeah, it's actually snowing right now, so it looks like I won't be driving into work today.
Oh
Thankfully,
yeah.
I get to work from home, so yeah.
Well,
And
it snowed here last week. I don't know if you heard, but it was. I saw at least some little salt shakers things coming out of the sky. So that's what snow looks like, right?
I think so, yeah. We're gonna get 3 inches of it, so I'll confirm that.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Two
thanks for
things about
yeah.
this morning's intro. As a DJ, the reggaeton horn just absolutely killed it. I love it. Just
Yeah,
very
thank you.
much so the vibes you're looking for in the morning. And when you guys do that what I call redneck rave or that field rave or the barn party or whatever you want to
Redneck
call it,
rave.
hit me up. I'm down.
That's a
That's my
great
cup of
name.
tea. So
Well, we can see those speakers there in the background, so that's how we know.
Well, once again, $5,000 per head. So,
Yeah.
come on down, DJ the show. We should have some leftover cash.
Yeah, and for those
Yeah.
of you who are curious, it's 355 street name at Princeton, Texas.
Have y'all seen Office Christmas Party?
No, I have not.
Oh, if you get a chance, it's a good Christmas movie that you might not want to see with your in-laws.
That's a really good intro for
Yeah,
for
there you
something I
go.
might want to watch.
But yeah, there's a DJ and it gets out of control, and so and of course he just does the sound himself, beep beep beep, just so.
Oh, that's great. Well, Justin, we've got a lot to talk about today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. But I think the first place for us to start would be with a little bit of your background. So why don't you give us let's start with kind of the quick intro of how you got to where you are today, and then we can dive in deeper into each one of those things. But yeah, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about growing up and some of the things that went on in your life when you're growing up.
yeah. So just to introduce myself, my name is Justin Corneau. I am 31 years old, and I am pretty much, I would say, a poster child for mental health at this point. I am someone that's worked on therapy for a long time, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So yeah, kind of going into my youth, I'm an Army brat. So my dad was in the Army, and that took me all over the world. When people ask me where I grew up, I don't have a great answer to that question. Usually it ends up being Texas because I spent a lot of time there, but I lived all over the South. Lived in Germany, and it was a very interesting way to grow up. But I also grew up in a space where there was a lot of things changed all the time. And one of the things that was passively always there was my dad would always be gone, and then he would be doing top secret missions. So I didn't really know where he was, and that definitely induced a lot of anxiety for me as a kid, not knowing if my dad was going to be able to come home safe from whatever he was doing, and not knowing exactly when that was going to be. So there's, I guess, a lot of stuff around that. And then probably one of the pivotal moments of my childhood was when I was 16. I lost my brother in a car accident. So that was probably the first time in which it became very obvious to me, at least, that I needed to start taking care of my mental health and be aware of the mental health of those around me. Eventually I went to Texas A&M University, whoop, and was able to complete an undergraduate in electrical engineering. Had no idea whatsoever where I wanted to go in life or what I wanted to do. Ended up at Boeing in Southern California and had a good time with that. Along that path, I had figured out that I was diagnosed with ADHD. I got married. I actively started to pursue a lot of the things in life that I do today, raving, going to shows and festivals, doing a lot of backpacking, kind of really got into that stuff out in Southern California. Unfortunately, I didn't surf as much, so Southern California wasn't really my home. The backpacking and skiing really was calling my name, and so I moved to Denver.
Well,
And
real quick, let me interject. For those who have only heard raving on TV or a movie or whatever, how would you describe that to the average person who's oh, those kids with their bebops and their doobity dops and their country hoedowns or whatever we called it? What do we call it?
I don't, Justin. Do you want to chime in here, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way I would describe it is the word that you used earlier, super fan. It's a bunch of those folks gathered together to listen to their favorite artists. And some people are there just to party. I will say that that's definitely something that goes on these days. But the majority of folks are there out of respect and love for the DJ that's putting his heart and soul into the craft that he's producing. So, and that to me is what it's about. And then it's about the good times, the good vibes, and the culture of that environment that is created from the music that's put on.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit extra myself because I've been in. So for those who aren't aware, we're talking about raving here, or going to a rave, which is usually associated with electronic music, sometimes called electronic dance music, or EDM for short. And there's a whole, I don't know, 1,000+ subgenres within that, which I think is one thing that people don't recognize. They're like, oh, I don't like things that are made electronically. It's like, well, you liked some of the rock that was made in the 70s and 80s that had a lot of electronic stuff going on. But yeah, so a topic for another day, but the electronic music is something that I think a lot of people should explore if they've never explored before. And then one thing I also want to mention that I found extremely special about attending some of these concerts, which some people call raves, either one, and is that it really helps you feel like you're a part of something else, something bigger. And there's really a special feeling there. And of course, some people amp that up or amplify that or change it and modify a little bit with the use of drugs at these things, just like people use drugs at other types of concerts. But even if you don't do that, even if you're stone cold sober, like there's something to be said about being around all those people. And the one sentence I said that sums it up really well is like, everyone is here to have a good time. And the fact that everyone is here for that reason and is here just vibing and enjoying it, and then also the music generally gives you something you can kind of disappear into, I think it's a very special thing that people should try out at least once in their life. You ever been to a rave?
Yeah. One of the best ones I went to was Dan Deacon out in Marfa. My
nice.
Goodness, that was insane. Like he did crowd control. He basically had everyone running around in crazy conga lines and doing things and running into like around the blocks because it was out in the middle of the street. Marfa's a tiny little town.
Nice.
And so, yeah, it was during a huge art festival down there. And yeah, so you can have, I don't know, amazing experiences and really sort of joining in with that stuff. So I'm a big fan. Yeah.
Yeah. So back to you though, Justin. We were talking about your life and how you'd been to California and you were just transitioning to how you moved over to Denver.
Yep. So I moved to Denver actually in the middle of last year. I got a job here, actually landed my dream job. Now I'm building a space station with a company called Aerospace, and really excited about that opportunity, getting to lead some of the most technical challenges that we have in development, to the future of space, really. So yeah, it's really exciting. In that same vein, I wouldn't be able to be taking on the challenges that I'm doing right now had I not undergone a lot of the changes that have happened to me in the last year, 2 years, and just the path that I'm on now, set myself up for success for the future.
Yeah. So yeah, appreciate that. And thank you for, I know there's so much in there. So it's a skill to be able to condense that into as short as you did. So I appreciate that. So let's start off with the military upbringing. And let's talk a little bit about what that looked like and what kind of effect you think that had on you as a kid, and then also maybe some of how that affected you today. And just so you're aware, one of the things that I put in the description was talking about, hey, you've had these things that have happened to you over the years, and how much does that shape who you are today, what type of person you are, the things you're doing, and one phrase I said is, how much can you, quote unquote, blame the past? And not that that's meant to be negative or whatnot. Don't take that for more than what it is. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about your military upbringing.
Yeah, and just I guess a quick point on that last part. The big thing for me that I've grown into in an understanding is to not let your past shape your current identity. So I try to really allow myself to be informed and to, check in and be honest with myself about what's happened so that I don't let past triggers just cause things to happen to me today, but not allowing that to be my identity and to choose the identity that I seek to be in, for the rest of my life. So, but I can absolutely say there are things that need to be addressed on that place of, growing up in a military household. And this could very likely not be anyone's experience other than mine. So please take that for what it is. But with that said, one of the things that I realized that I struggled with as a kid that was really hard for me as a man in society today to understand was anxiety. Anxiety is really tricky, and I didn't even realize that I was anxious. obviously I was, because I couldn't wait for my dad to get home, but then he wouldn't come home. So that would create this feedback loop of like, okay, I'm waiting for something to change. I'm waiting for him to be back to feel safe again. And that never went away. There's a part of this through therapy that I've started to understand. It's a form of what's called complex PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder, where you experience things over and over, and even micro traumas or small things that may happen that affect you like that can really shape you and change your way that you view the world. And so for me, it's the little things in life that may feel a little off, can really kind of drive me to feel like there's something actually wrong, and to be a little trying to figure out exactly what's going on in my life without the need to. So being hyper vigilant, if you will. So yeah, that's definitely a part of my military upbringing that was interesting. Another part, as the oldest of three children when my father was away, feeling very responsible as a young boy to take care of my family. And that definitely was something that I had to understand as I grew up further, especially as my dad returned from service. Caused a lot of conflict because I felt like I had instantiated a place in my family as a masculine, not necessarily authority, but a figure. And I was not shown any respect whatsoever for that when my dad came home. So even in the very beginning years of my teens, I was actually in therapy just with him to work on some of those issues, to try to resolve, some of the conflict, teenage angst, if you will. But it caused a lot of conflict in my family. So as young as I guess age 12, 13, I was in therapy trying to work through some of that stuff with my dad.
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to point out was first how like you were anxious but you didn't realize it, because that's a
Yep.
phrase that I've now heard multiple times as I've talked with people, just friends and family, as they found to started to discover themselves a little bit more, and they're like, "Wow, I didn't realize it at the time, but then when I started to hear these things described, and I was like, oh, wait, that actually sounds a lot like me. That sounds a lot like the things I've been feeling." And then they start to get into that. And it's like, whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's ADHD, whether it's any number of mental things or chemical imbalances, it's like, oh, that helps explain a lot. And I
Hmm.
say that to point out to our viewers at home, like, hey, anytime you feel like something's off, or you think you always do something a certain way or whatever, like if maybe there's something you feel like is making you do something more often or less often, like that's a good time to look inside and reflect and be like, hey, maybe there's something going on. And that's a great time to maybe talk to a third party person. So as Justin mentioned, he's been in therapy now for decades, which is, you should have do you have little gold stars or badges for achievement? Because that's
I
a long
don't know.
time.
Yeah, on and off definitely for, over 10 years. I guess we're getting close to 20 years if you're actually counting. The
If I'm
numbers are
getting
just
old, you're
numbers.
getting old. Okay.
It's not fair. It just keeps happening.
Yes.
But, but,
That's,
but yeah, I think that it's really important to understand, and that's the part for me that, I'll touch on a little bit later, but to really own who you are is a very, very difficult process. To own your experience, because it's scary. And there's a lot of shame and judgment in society these days, and that comes from a lot of different places. And I'm actively trying to dismantle that through my own personal experience, and providing my experience to other people. And I think that's exactly what you just said, to check in with yourself and to hear from other people, and to not just dismiss something that someone else is going through because you don't have the intensity that they have it at. But there's absolutely something there for you to look at normally in your life, especially if it triggers you in some way.
yeah, one thing we say a lot on here is that I feel like for me personally, at least, one of the big switches was when I recognized that, hey, it's not a binary thing. And also, it's not like something that is wrong with you as a person. It's like, no, these are all spectrums. And, Ryder has anxiety sometimes, Ryder has depression sometimes, I have anxiety sometimes, I have depression sometimes. It just has that varying intensity and length of time. And the earlier you learn that, I think the better off you are. And also recognizing that, hey, maybe you aren't feeling or experiencing those things right now, but that might be part of your environment. And as a upper middle class white dude, like before I quit my job and decided to move and live into a tiny box on wheels and started my own company, like life was gravy for me, and I didn't have any depression, I didn't have any anxiety or any of these things. But as I started to expose myself to a lot more of these stressful situations, I started to relate a lot more. And I started to be like, oh, okay, I can see that. I got this ding about my bank account balance. Like, all right, I see how that feels, and I see how that sucks. And oh, by the way, like I'm still, financially better off than a whole bunch of people who are like, literally, if I don't get this money, I can't eat. So it's like I can't relate all the way, right? But I can start to see a little bit of like, okay, it varies based on who you are, where you are in your life, the environment's going around you, and it's a spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. I remember something similar when I was in my early 30s. One of my jobs I was at, I was taking on everything, just handling everything, working insane hours. And at the time, I didn't really believe in stress. Like, we didn't use the term anxiety as much then. It was just stress, and so I was just like, no, I don't believe in it. Like, I just lead through all the challenges, and I'm just tackling all of them, and I'm just kicking butt and taking names. And then all of a sudden, it was like burnout hit. It was just like, man, all of a sudden, it was just like debilitating. It was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is crazy. And of course, that kind of kicked in a fight or flight response. And just sort of going like, oh, these are all evolutionary mechanisms that we have within us. And you can do a lot with mindset to get over some of them, but eventually a lot of these things catch up. And when they do, and you don't have any sort of skills or anything else to recognize it or handle it, it can really be bad for you.
Absolutely, really agree with that point, Ryder. I think it's interesting to think about. There's obvious triggers in life that can happen. For example, the next thing that I'll bring up, but it's the analogy of boiling like a frog in water and just slowly increasing the temperature. I mean, that's probably the most difficult way to identify what's actually going on when something like that happens. So yeah, I want to keep cruising along through some of the things
Please.
I'd like to discuss. The next topic, my brother passing away when I was 16, absolutely shaped my life forever, and I would say in ways that are both good and bad. As I talked about complex PTSD, I identify with that. So just some backstory: my brother was 2 years younger than me. He actually struggled very intimately with mental health. He had a lot of issues, even leading up to his death. But it was just a freak accident. He took his longboard out one day after school, and just said, "Bye, Mom. I'm going to go longboard." And about 2 minutes later, a police officer was at our door, and he had been driving by, saw the accident, and immediately took my mom to the hospital. And then I had to go with my sister to the hospital. And my dad was actually in Washington, D.C. at the time, working for the Pentagon. And he had got on a plane immediately, came home. And I just remember him telling me, while I was driving in the car, when I wasn't driving, someone had picked us up, but telling me, you need to be the man of the family now. You need to show up. And that's always stuck with me a little bit. Just kind of not allowing myself to fully feel or heal in that moment of what was going on, and kind of what that, to me, some of the toxic masculinity maybe that goes on these days about masculine strength and what that truly means. But yeah, the biggest thing was just, I lost one of my best friends in the world, and it was incredibly traumatic and caused a lot of ripples in my life. But one of the first things that I can say that happened from that is now I have an experience in life that allows me to relate to other people as they go through this obvious, difficult, and inevitable part of life. So I've allowed myself to continue to shine that light through the world as the pain that I experience can help others. At the same time, it's led me to therapy, and then being okay with it, and then having to go back into therapy because it evolves as you get older, and there's other difficulties that have come about. I've sought specific types of therapy for it. So yeah, it's been a very dynamic part of my life, and I definitely think there's a whole podcast probably just on that process of losing a loved one.
Yeah, I think it's a significant trauma that you experience, and of course, I know you personally, so we've talked about this many times, but this is a horrible thing, and I'm very sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah, thank you.
Can't even imagine, right? Especially knowing what my relationship's like with my siblings, and trying to picture what that would be like for me. It is tough, very tough. But one of the things about having that trauma, as you mentioned, is starting to deal with it. And one of the things I think you were alluding to was like, hey, you had a man in your life who said, hey, be the man. Don't feel things. Be strong. Be that anchor for people. And what they didn't say was, but at some time you need to go process those emotions. So what did that look like for you, and when did you start to really process it?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as he got there, really, right? So he was able to catch a flight and be at the hospital. And as soon as he was there, something in me let loose and I just broke down. And I let myself be the 16-year-old boy that I was. Um, yeah, it was incredibly cathartic to really heal in that hospital. It was just a very difficult time to be in the room with him while he was, I guess, still slightly warm. And it's a very traumatic experience still that I go through, experiencing just the healing part of that. Had I not had the opportunity to say goodbye in that state, I feel like it would have even caused further issues. So, yeah, starting immediately, I would say. And then eventually, I think they recommended from the school, they put me into a grief group with other kids that had had similar experiences. And then starting to heal, I started to get into therapy. My mom had been in therapy when she was a teen and an adult, and just realized, this is the absolute thing. Let's get this person help. I guess the thing about that I wanted to talk about was the very first time that I realized I needed to change therapists. Something that I think is really important for everyone to understand about therapy and the therapy process. It is very much so like dating. You will not love every single therapist that you go to, and you need to try multiple out sometimes to figure out if this is the one for you. Sitting there in the very first therapy relationship that I ever had, just feeling like this isn't going anywhere and frustrated, and like I'm already really sad, like I don't you're supposed to be helping me but they're not. And you can't put everything on every person. So, just saying, okay, thank you, I think I'm going to try to find someone else a little bit, and if that doesn't work out, then of course I can come back. But yeah, switching therapists in that first place was really a very powerful, empowering experience for me, understanding my own autonomy and agency in this process.
Yeah, we talked about on a previous episode, maybe a couple, about that. Hey, just because you decide to start getting therapy and you start during that process, is recognize that it's a process. And especially if you're someone who is like, oh, I'm not going to therapy, I'm not going to therapy, I'm not going to therapy. Oh, fine, I'll go to therapy. And you go with this, like, I'm going to do this one thing and I'm looking for it to fail because I don't want to do this anyways. Like, if you go into it with that attitude, like, you're setting yourself up for failure, first of all. But a great point from Justin is that it is okay and maybe even expected that you will be changing therapist once, if not multiple times, as you're trying to find the person who vibes the most with you, right? And I will give a little bit of cautionary advice and say, hey, especially if it's your first time ever going to therapy, like maybe have more than one session. And obviously it's up to you to read those red flags and just how bad it is versus just maybe your guttural reaction to the whole therapy process as a whole. Because, you tell me, Justin, but I imagine there's not that much value in going to 5 different therapists. I would imagine you'd get a little more from diving deeper with one of them. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, especially because America hasn't figured out our mental health system, and it's really expensive to go to therapy. I think it doesn't behoove you to sit there and spend $1,000 a week on therapy sessions, and try that 5-person route. Yeah, having a plan, I think, is the best way to attack it. Like, what are my goals? They will always ask you that too. What are your therapy goals? So having those and being able to evaluate, what is this person's expertise? How do I feel about this relationship is a huge part of it too.
Yeah, and recognizing that with the therapy, whenever that comes up, well, first off, I wanted to point out you said $1,000 a week, and I just wanted to say that, hey, it's not always $1,000 a week. There are different types
Right.
of programs. There's insurance. There's what's called sliding scale, which is where a clinic will have various levels of prices based on your ability to pay. And there's a lot of ways that people can get support at a more affordable rate. So I just want to make sure to mention that for those at home. So
Yeah, that was the 5-person, 5 times
yeah,
200, usually somewhere around the 200. That'll probably set you back about 1,000 a week.
right, but yes, it can vary. So on the therapy, and the next thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about that you mentioned was ADHD. So that's kind of related to mental health, to therapy. Tell us a little bit about how you first discovered that and what that was like for you.
Loosely related to mental health. No, ADHD is my prime, what I would say my prime ADHD or my prime mental health indicator for how my life is doing. If I am managing my ADHD symptoms and the things that I know that I need to do, then I can tell, I'm doing well. And if I'm not and things are chaotic, and usually what that means is things are a mess, in my house, in my life, I'm not getting my things done and I'm just feeling disorganized all the time. There's usually some other underlying things that are going on there too, either some depression or anxiety. But ADHD is driving the bus. So Yeah, definitely very interesting. I guess not really being in stressful situations in high school. I was always a gifted and talented student and took AP classes, and I never really struggled at all. And then I decided, yeah, I want to be an engineer. That's awesome. Like it's my aptitude level, and I just absolutely floundered in undergrad. I got a scholarship for my first year. It was a small, like $1,000 scholarship, but I lost it because my GPA went down below a 3.0. I actually think went as low as like a 2.7 in my freshman year. So that was the point at which I realized that there was something else going on, and it was deeper than just the issues that I was dealing with my brother's death. And so I went to from after talking, with some people. I had a roommate that really struggled with ADHD, and through talking with him, I realized, like you said, wow, I have a lot of those things that go on in my life. Maybe I should go get tested. So I went to a doctor, and there was no test. It was, here's the drugs. So there's a lot of things in the mental health system these days that I think is very interesting in that aspect. But yeah, so without really getting a test or trying to do anything, because there's a lot of ways that you can go about this. But I had a lot of the markers and the symptoms, and yeah, so that pretty much put me on the path of taking ADHD medication, and yeah, the benefits were immediate. I mean, my GPA went up almost a full point just for the next semester, and I started really figuring out all the things I needed to do, scheduling, making to-do lists, and checking things off. Those two things just are insurmountable help in my life to get to where I need to be today. A lot of the things that I will say, though, ADHD and using stimulants, for example, for medication, there's a lot of stigma around that these days. And I had a lot of people actually to my face tell me, like, you are not worth the grades that you're getting because you're not doing them sober. And I have to do them sober, so you should have to do it sober too. And those people, in my opinion, are very ignorant about what's actually going on in my brain. And they have no idea the neurochemical imbalances that I experience and how that affects my life. And yeah, I think it's just one of those other things about mental health that needs to be broken down. That is one of those pain points that everyone's going to have to go through if you're going to try to take this journey on yourself. Is understanding the stigma around medication and the stigma around just in general what you need to own for yourself. And one of my main points that I want to just say to everyone: screw what everyone thinks, screw what other people think. It's your life. It's important for you to focus on the important things that you can do for yourself to get you better. So but yeah, in that process, I guess, wasn't really going to therapy as much. I had a lot of things going on in college and was really focused on that. So really more focused on my grades, on my aptitude, on working through my ADHD symptoms and getting that handled. So I guess I took a little bit of a hiatus in terms of therapy there for a while. I did a little bit when I would have some issues and go back home, and I would make an appointment with my previous therapist, but took a little bit of time off there.
Yeah, so that's also something that we just talked about in a previous episode as well. With Ryder, started it. I don't know if it was his first therapy appointment off the top of my head, but at least one of the main times he's had a big stint of therapy, and he did it for about a year. And at least sometime within the last few weeks, he decided to take a break and say, hey, all right, I've done a lot of work. I've processed a lot of things. I've got a lot of tools now. I can recognize situations. I can know what to do. Hey, if A happens, maybe I should do B, that type of stuff. And he's like, all right, now I'm going to take a little bit of a break from therapy and then see how that goes. And Ryder had to step away for a phone call real quick. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that idea of, hey, do I need to always be in therapy, or should I leave and come back, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's really important to be able to check in with yourself and to know what's really helping you in your life. I think that's true about everything, about substances, about relationships. Is this serving me? Is there a way in which this is not serving me? And if so, how can I go about at least inspecting that and taking a chance to, change that for me? So yeah, I guess in that same place, I'd like to go then into some of the other stuff that has led me to even further therapy, which was getting married at the age of 23. I got
Yeah, who would
married, and
who would do that? I mean, we were just talking
I
about
mean,
that, right? Oh,
all the
10
all
years
the
for me
all the
next
cool
year.
kids, all the cool kids from Texas that I know got married at 20, 22, 23. So no,
Right.
it is definitely more of a Southern thing. The more that I moved around the U.S., I've realized not everyone gets married at that young of an age. But yeah, I struggled a lot in a lot of issues that I had when I got married. And it was interesting to experience those things and to not understand them. A lot of the dynamics from my family of origin that I propagated into my relationship. And I think we all bring, what we experience from the
Real
past.
quick, define that term for me. Family of origin.
Your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your family of origin, who popped you out.
I guess let me rephrase. What makes you say it that way?
It's just a very succinct term instead of saying my family,
Okay.
because that could mean like just broadly. No, I'm just talking about like the people I grew up with.
Cool. All right, keep
So
going.
that if you grew up with your grandma, like that could be your family of origin, for example,
Nice.
who you spent the most time with and who your patterns come from.
I hadn't heard that
But yeah,
term
with
before.
that,
Thanks for sharing.
yeah, you're welcome. With that, I think there's just a huge part of that process where I recognized when I started having issues in my relationship, okay, there's ways to deal with this. And so I started into personal therapy again, and eventually was also in couples therapy. And just trying to explore that process, I did a number of different things, outpatient programs that were focused around like being specific into different parts of your mental health in your life, like a weekend where you would spend time with folks, not necessarily focused on like actual skill sets, but really more like how can we get some of the issues that you've experienced to the surface so that we can help you process them. Some things that people might call a little airy fairy because it was California, but just really, really good dynamic stuff that I still reflect on to this day that's helped me to bring stuff to the surface. One of the things, meeting another military child in there, that feeling of do your duty is just one of those aspects of growing up as a military child that you continue on as an adult. You don't know exactly what that is, but it's this intense feeling of like, okay, something's wrong. I have to step up and help other people here. And I have since learned that, for me at least, that is the driver for my codependency, or being codependent. I think you touched on that in a podcast last week. The aspect of feeling like you need someone and you need something there, so you do something for them, and then there's this kind of reciprocal, even if the other person doesn't participate in it, relationship that you are engaging in that is dynamic and unhealthy in a lot of ways. So, but yeah, so there's a lot of those aspects of mental health that I struggle with. Years of couples therapy, years of personal therapy. My personal therapy route was very interesting too, because as I figured out, okay, I've dealt with a lot of this stuff in my personal relationship, stuff would then come back up with my brother. And I actually had to I found a specific therapy that was recommended to me called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and retraining. I think that is close. But basically the aspect of you're following someone's finger in, and there's a couple different methods to doing it, but distracting your brain using your eye movement and allowing you to kind of bring up and process difficult emotions. And the only way I can describe the therapy in one session for me was like taking an IMAX movie of trauma that I had experienced with my brother and just kind of shrinking it down to that little 16-inch screen in the corner that was just on. And I didn't have to look at it. I didn't have to experience it every time it was going on, but I knew it was there, and I knew it was my movie that I could watch, but I didn't have to own it every single moment of every day. And when it came up, it wasn't the IMAX feeling. So yeah, very interesting. I think that's a very helpful part of therapy, is to understand it. It's a modality, and there are plenty of different modalities. I could go learn any form of martial arts, but what kind of martial arts is really going to get you to your goal that you want? And I think that's the part that is important for people to note. There is the different kinds of therapy, and recognizing when you need, because it's not always going to be a professional that's going to offer that to you, recognizing when you need to pursue something different.
Yeah, and here we have a little hard to read on the screen. Sorry, but eye movement deconsolidation and reprocessing.
Yeah.
So that's the acronym there. So EMDR. So a couple things there. One, I wanted to make sure for those of you at home who were wondering what episode Justin was talking about, that was our episode on Friday, episode 77. We'll post a link for that in the chat. And we were talking about boundaries. And in case you might not guess, dealing with codependency, which is where you are depending on another person and maybe they're depending on you in an unhealthy way. You're taking it too far. That goes a lot with boundaries. So naturally it came up. And we also mentioned in that, and I'll mention here again today, there is something called Codependence Anonymous as one possible source for people if you want to look into that. And there are others as well. So Justin, we were talking about we talked about your life. We talked about your brother. We talked about college. We've now talked about your ADHD and your marriage. How you mentioned that problems started to manifest themselves a little bit more in your marriage, and some of your personal problems came into that. I wanted to point out first off that one of the things our relationship expert Eric Wooten has said in the past is like, hey, a lot of marriages end because of personal issues, not necessarily relational issues. Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to respond to that, but I guess my real question for you is how did, these issues within your marriage culminate, and what did that end up leading to, and where are you at with that today?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me was my depression in 2018. I had a really, really hard time coming to terms with everything that was going on. And it was a big focus of mine to try to fix everything. And in trying to fix everything, I spun out. I was working, a little bit more in a new role that I'd taken on at work. And I was doing all this therapy. I was also trying to get my physical health taken care of. At that time, I was having significant jaw issues, back pain, and it was so much. And I just started to get really depressed and actually had to take time off work. Thankfully, I had family medical leave in California, so I was able to get paid while I was taking time off work. And I went to an outpatient program, and I decided that I was just going to spend time working on myself. I did a lot of therapy help there, but I was also trying different drugs to try to help me. And that's one of the things that I will say about this is it's really important to understand that there are tools outside of therapy to help you when you feel stuck. And trying drugs like antidepressants, mood stabilizers, those two things that I tried, they can be very helpful for a lot of people. Now, I will say my personal experience was absolutely awful. It was just ridiculous. The side effects for me were just really bad, and that's very personal. Again, do not take my thing and say I'm not going to try these, because Justin said he had some really poopy symptoms, but
Nice
there are
entry. I
parts of
like
that. Yeah, I literally one of the drugs was like I was the most constipated I've ever been in my entire life, and I just couldn't
Oh,
handle it.
literally
And I asked,
poopy. Okay.
yeah, I was, yeah, between that and then the other one, it was a drug called Lamictal, and I would take it, and it was incredibly difficult, especially as a man that prides himself on some of his intelligence, to not be able to say sentences correctly, to take the first letter of two words and swap them completely and then say them, and then my brain completely bypassed that. That happened probably for even 6 months after I took the drug. So it was really difficult. And I was like, look, I'd rather be depressed than have these issues, honestly. Yeah, so ultimately what helped me the most was just going back, doing EMDR in that process started to wake me up, but then focusing on meditation and journaling. And those two things for me were really, really what pulled me out of it. That, and then the sense of community that I got from engaging in going to raves and doing outpatient programs. And then the biggest thing that I can say too is I started backpacking by myself. And I eventually worked up to doing really long distance, but I'm an Eagle Scout, and nature has always been a part of my life. And going back into the backcountry on a regular basis was incredibly helpful for me to get to the place where I feel like I am now with my self-confidence and, the suicidal ideation, as a term, just the concept of feeling like I idealize the idea of suicide, and as a trigger warning for some folks, that was something that I really dealt with. I never had any actual thoughts or plans to hurt myself, but I would think about on a regular basis when I was the most depressed what it would be like to not be in the current situation. And I believe there's a Buddhist monk somewhere that has said that it's not that you actually want to kill yourself, it's that you want to kill a part of yourself. And so that was a part that I really wasn't able to identify with until I started making these pivotal changes, and I realized, no, that part of me needs to die. The part that wants to hurt me needs to go away. And that was just something that took a lot of time and a lot of just allowing myself to be open and honest with the people around me, and to get the help and to get some support that I needed. But ultimately, it's the hard work that gets you there. So, yeah, so I touched a little bit on drugs that didn't work for me. And I just want to point out that there's some beautiful things going on in the world of mental health today. MAPS, which is a group in the, I guess, at the federal level, they're trying to help take the entheogens and pathogens, different psychedelics, if you will. MAP stands for the Medicinal Applications for Psychedelic Studies. And they're trying to take those drugs and to help people. So I'm really excited about what they call the third wave of psychedelics and trying to get those things that people think don't have, crazy side effects, but that have the potential to help people. They're taking those and doing actual legal testing on people with PTSD, using MDMA specifically for people that come back from war and trying to help them with treatment-resistant PTSD. They're also doing the same thing with psilocybin. So I'm very excited about what the future of mental health, not only because of the fact that we have people, medical professionals that feel strongly about not just pointing their patients to these really side effect prone drugs, but also the fact that we're just continuing to explore what that looks like. And to me, it helps to destigmatize not only the drugs that could potentially help you, but the fact that it's just still this whole baby thing that we don't even understand. It's in its infancy, if you will. We've really only been practicing most of the mental health stuff that we've been practicing for 40 years or something like that. So,
yeah. So for those who are wanting to learn a little bit more about MAPS, just so you're aware what the acronym is, it's Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and we've posted a link for that in the chat. And yeah, I think, we've already now heard Justin mention a couple of different types of therapy and different techniques. We had the EMDR. I don't remember the expanded acronym. Sorry. We have the EMDR, and now we're talking about the potential use of psychoactive drugs in a way. It's unfortunate all the stigma that gets associated with these things because of a lot of societal issues and things like that have been built up over decades. But the good news is work is being done to undo some of that and to educate people a little bit on that. And I say a lot with drugs, whether it be prescription or just recreational or, quote unquote, recreational drugs that you try and use in some non-recreational way to help better yourself or whatnot. I think the biggest thing is educating yourself, making sure you know what you're doing, what the dosages are, what the possible side effects are, making sure you're doing everything you can to make sure that you're doing it in a safe way. Ideally, you're involved with some people who have experience with that, and that's unfortunately one of the hard things about doing drugs that are illegal, is because they are legal. It makes things a little shadier, and it leads to some things like, oh, maybe this thing is laced. But fortunately, there are ways you can test drugs before you take them. So that's another tip for people. And of course, we are not condoning the use of illicit drugs. But if you're deciding to use illicit drugs, the thing we will say is make sure you be safe about it and make sure you educate yourself about it. Real quick, though, I wanted to point out and ask a question. And if you want to be vague about it, that's fine, too. But you mentioned earlier a couple of drugs that had some side effects and things like that. Were those things that you had been prescribed by a psychiatrist or something? Okay. And you're nodding yes because we're audio as well.
yes.
But with those drugs, you mentioned a couple side effects you have, and yes, for those who are not aware, anytime you've ever heard a commercial about a drug, they have on the bottom, and they say in the really long-winded short thing, it said, and there's a bit of and diarrhea and death and all these things that could happen, right? And the reality is like, those are in there because they can happen to a certain amount of people. But the drug company and the FDA, by the way, has decided that, hey, those side effects that happen to some people, not all people, are worth having because they help. The main thing that the drug is trying to do is worth doing. And so, hey,
Yep.
maybe it's worth you having a little bit of digestive issues if you can, push through that depression. Now, and obviously, as in Justin's case and maybe in some other people's cases, those side effects are too much for you. And that's also part of the process, part of the treatment process, whether it be for mental health or physical issues or otherwise. Anytime you're dealing with prescription drugs or otherwise, that's part of the process is saying, hey, I tried this thing out. And oh, by the way, let me have, obviously check with a medical professional and all this stuff. But sometimes it takes a little while for your body to get used to it because the body is an amazing thing and it can adapt and change to, maybe you start out with some side effects or issues, but then they go away because your body gets used to it. So yeah, but part of that is also a little bit like a dating process as well. It's like, hey, I've been on this drug now for a few weeks or a few months or whatever it may be. I'm starting to wonder if maybe it would be better for me to do something else or for me to try this other thing. Another point that you made in there kind of implicitly, but I want to make sure to make explicit is, hey, drugs are just one part of treatment. And I don't know your personal opinion on this, but my personal opinion and bias on this is drugs should only be one part of it. And I think if you're not treating the behavioral side, and you're not talking through things, and you're not exploring the root causes, then you're only doing yourself a disservice, and also potentially people around you, because they have to deal with you. That being said, I think drugs can be a great first step for some people, especially for certain disorders. Is like, hey, so for example, with ADHD, like, yeah, therapy would maybe help with some things, but chemical imbalances in your brain, sometimes you need another chemical to help balance things out, or to help counteract that. So for those who are either doing nothing right now, or I would say, hey, maybe consider using that as a first step and start to get into it. But then make sure you start to dig a little deeper, peel back those layers, and find out what are all the other things going on. Because as one term we use in engineering, is something called root cause analysis. And there's also something called a fishbone diagram, if people want to Google something. But basically, you see at the end, let's just say, for example, a plane crashed. Well, what caused that plane to crash? And you follow it back and say, okay, well, this thing didn't fire. Well, why did it not fire? Well, with a plane crash, there's like multiple things have to go wrong. So basically, you get all the way down to the root cause, and you find out, hey, Joey came to work drunk that day, and he installed everything backwards. That was the root cause. Like, yeah, we went and dealt with all these other things that came from it, but getting to that root cause is important.
Yeah, I would completely agree with a lot of what you just said. Specifically that it's only one part of the process, and that you should definitely not be ashamed to try it. I would almost never recommend it be the first course of action, though. I would always try to try something else. For me, at least, I feel, and this is again part of what I struggle with to this day, I feel kind of trapped inside of using this drug. I feel like I've gotten to a point of my aptitude where I really figured things out, but could I do what I want to do in my life without these drugs, right? So I would highly recommend people, from personal experience, just try to go into a place where you do what you can do for yourself without drugs. And I think honestly, there's a whole podcast on that. Everything you talked about, like titrating drugs, going up and down in doses, trying to figure that out, getting actively tested, going to the right psychiatrist, that kind of stuff. So if you'd ever love to have the conversation, I'd love to continue that at some point in the future. But
for sure.
yeah,
Real quick,
I would agree
titrating.
with that.
What is that word?
Titrate, just kind of as you increase or decrease the drug up or down. So a lot of drugs, for example, the ones that you were talking about that your body needs to get used to, you take like a very low dose for maybe a quarter of the dose that would be therapeutic for like 2 weeks. And then you ramp up to what's an appropriate level. If you were to take an antidepressant like that, just out of the blue, it could send your body into some sort of shock that would be difficult for you to kind of process the symptoms that are going on. So then you kind of just slowly build up into it. So yeah, that process. And I think, again, like there is so much of this that people are just like, all right, now we're going to do this. And it's like, I never went to medical school. I don't know any of this stuff. Like, how am I supposed to be comfortable with this? Just hearing your friends talk about it, I think, is one of the best ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So we've talked about, your childhood. We talked about your college. You talked about life in LA, and now you've moved to Denver. What was some of the inspiration or reasons that you were trying to get to Denver?
Yeah, I had always wanted to live in Colorado at some level. Again, following my arc of raving, I ended up going to a music festival out here, and one of my favorite bands, Zed's Dead, performs at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Morrison, Colorado. For those of you that don't know, it is one of the most amazing outdoor music venues you could ever go to in your entire life. So yeah, I came out here a couple times. Also went skiing, and I was just like, it's definitely my next move. And yeah, the circumstances of life happened. My marriage ended, and I basically was looking for that next thing that was going to really enable me to be happy and to pursue the things that I'd always wanted. I realized, backpacking and skiing, which are two of the easiest things for me to do here, are also my favorite things to do. I was living 15 minutes from the ocean in Southern California and 2 hours from the mountains. And I was like, I need to swap that. I need to be a 2 hour plane ride from the ocean and, an hour, 15 minutes from hiking and stuff. So it was a huge part of it. I got an incredible job. As I said, I was newly single, so it was pretty much just up to me to make that happen. And yeah, I went full force into that direction. So it was a really powerful move for me. I got a promotion and a raise, and just really actively engaged in seeking my true happiness. And I guess in that part too, there were a lot of systems that I set up for myself when I began the divorce process that enabled me to feel successful in that. So yeah, there's some really good stuff that I set myself up for success with.
Yeah, and divorce is a topic in and of itself that again, I think we could have a whole episode on, and we probably need to at some time in the future. But for those of you at home who have been following Helpful for Life for a little while, you may notice a coincidence in last names. So I just wanted to point out that Libby Corneau, who we've had on previous shows, is connected to Justin Corneau here, which is another interesting thing for us as friends, which is interesting in a lot of marriages when a divorce happens is, okay, how do you maintain friendships, or do you maintain friendships, and how do you do that without it getting complicated or messy? And the short answer is there is no short answer. So we'll talk about that one in depth another day, I'm sure. But I wanted to focus as we start to wrap up here a little bit on what some of the things are. What are some of those systems that you've put into place? What are some of the things that you've learned about and you've discovered over the last few years that you found have helped you become this ultimate you that you're working on becoming, right? And what are some of the things that are helping you as a person, as a man, to become successful, to achieve the things you want to achieve in life, to do less of the things that you don't want to do, to let those parts of you die that you want to die. So yeah, what are some of the things that you've done that have helped you today? Like, what are some of these systems, and what are some of these things?
Well, just brick by brick, dismantling the patriarchy single-handedly is pretty much the
Perfect.
one thing.
Perfect. One
No,
brick at a time.
I would say, kind of in that direction, specifically the societal pressure. I don't know, when I got into therapy, I would bring up this concept of like, but I need to do this. And then my therapist would try to dig down, like, why do you feel that way? And I was like, well, society tells me that I need to do that stuff. And I just dealt with this like constant passive layer of toxic masculinity my whole life. Like, I am such an emotional man. As a unicorn, I recognize I am open with my feelings and honest, and I share them with others, sometimes even without them asking for it. And I can kind of shock people sometimes with how open I am. But it's been relieving because it's continued to allow me to recognize that's my path in life, to open up to people, to be honest, and to help them feel more comfortable with sharing their experience. So, yeah, the toxic masculinity part was something that I really looked to deal with. And I started to get involved in different support groups and in a couple different directions. I've worked on support for specific issues. And then outside of that, I realized, it's really specifically helpful when I am only in the group of men. And so actually, Reed, from one of your contacts that you put me in touch with, I was able to get the top 10 things that any man should do in a divorce. And one of those things was join a men's team. And I'd always heard of like men's team, whatever, but he was like specifically MDI, or Mentor, Discover, Inspire. And I don't know if you guys can throw a link up there for
Yeah,
that,
we will.
but yeah, the mission of MDI is to cause greatness by mentoring men to live with excellence, and as mature masculine leaders, create successful families, careers, and communities. And I just read that and I was like, I almost cried. I was like, this is everything I've ever wanted with my entire life. So, I went on their website, put in my information, and I got contacted by someone, and they put me through basically like the beginning process of the orientation and some of the training. And then I got thrown on a men's team. And I cannot say anything other than my life is completely changed forever. It's the most powerful environment that I've ever been in. It's the most accountability that I've ever had. It's the most honesty and transparency I've ever engaged in. And it is actually brick by brick dismantling the views that I had about masculinity and how toxic it could be versus what mature masculinity is. So that to me is the biggest change in my life that I've had, and I would say it's been the biggest thing that will continue to propel me in the direction that I needed to go, because my team is always there for me. I'm actually leading the team that I'm on right now, and it's just a beautiful process of engaging with men all over the world. Really, as a virtual team, we have the opportunity to have men from. I work with men from Canada on a regular basis, and we had a man from Brazil. It's a very dynamic environment, and it's very, very, very rewarding to have relationships with men that continue to improve my life. And I think honestly, there's just something to be said in general about having people in your life that are on a path of success or oriented in a positive direction, and getting those people to help lift you up as they lift themselves up, and not in telling you, you need to do what I'm doing, in as a mature masculine man saying, hey, you see this thing that you're doing? Why are you doing that? Don't do that. And I guess there was a part of this for me kind of going all the way back. Like I'd always been looking for that with my father and for the men in my life, and I never really felt like I got that. And so there's a part of this where, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that's very true, to engage in the support and the help of everyone around you when you don't get what you need from the relationships that you have in your life, from your family of origin, from, you know, the places that you seek. Keep looking. It's out there.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, again, that's another reason why that term family of origin, I like that a lot, because it's like, you know, people like to talk about the whole blood is thicker than water. And as we
Mm-hmm.
pointed out in the show before, well, if you actually read that entire quote, it actually says the opposite of the way a lot of people mean it. And so the point is just because you're born into a certain family does not mean that, you know, indebts you or you need to do certain things or have to be associated with them forever and whatnot. Now, all that being said, like obviously there's benefits to that, but there's also benefits sometimes to getting away. And maybe that's a temporary thing, maybe that's a permanent thing, but I want to make sure to encourage those of you at home who do struggle with your families to keep that in mind. Like this is your family of origin, and you know if you're below the age of 18, certainly that makes things a little more complicated, and maybe it's not the best for you to leave. But as you get older, you know, and as you become an adult, that is something you can decide. Like, hey, I want to spend less time with these people or do less with these people. So I the other thing I wanted to point out was that this goes hand in hand with a lot of the things we've been learning from one of our relationship experts, Eric Wooten. So we're going to share a playlist to all of his appearances in the chat, so you guys can learn more if you'd like to. But he, in his first episode with us, he talked about the three pillars they use with with his company, Altered Marriage, and with the first episode, he talks about the three pillars, and which are community, which is what exactly we're talking about here with this men's team. And he says it's not just having people around you, but it's having someone around you who's also going to call you on your shit and say, hey, Justin, like you need to do this. And like, I'm shaking you right now and saying you're messing up right now. Like you need to own that, which comes to the second pillar, which is personal responsibility. You need to own that and you need to do something about it. And then the third pillar is intentionality, which is okay. So I've got this community around me to help support me. I'm taking the personal responsibility for the things that I did and things that I'm doing presently, and then I'm taking the initiative. I'm being intentional. To make things better and to try and improve myself, to try and improve the relationship. So I think that is a wonderful place for people to go next if they're vibing at all with this episode and they want to learn a little bit more about some of the actions they can take and some of the things they can do. I think that playlist is a great place for them to start. Any thoughts on any of that, Justin?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think the biggest part of the you know, the personal being able to engage and have ownership over these issues. It's one thing for someone to tell you like, look, you're messing this up, and sometimes they're a little bit more tactful in the way that they'll get there by asking you questions to feel like you arrived at that solution yourself. But ultimately, it's about having that feeling of identity of this is my problem to own, and I'm going to take care of this because that is what I do as a man, and owning that issue, realizing that that's kind of what my father meant back in the day, is that it's my issue to own. But my issue at that point was just to own my grief at that moment and not anything else, right? So yeah, it's very again, everything's very dynamic, and I would completely agree. I think, you know, continuing to go back into a space of looking at it from a personal perspective and looking for that community is a very powerful part.
Yeah.
I
So
did
think.
have
Go ahead.
I was going to say I had some quick closing thoughts to kind of wrap all that stuff up. Some a little bit more of like a meta part.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We're all about meta. You know, yesterday we were talking about marketing and we went full meta on that one. So absolutely, please take us to the wrap up. The one thing I wanted to say before letting you do that was we will be having an episode or at least a segment on a future episode specifically on the topic of a men's team or a team of people around you that is meant for support, because it is something that I have multiple people in my life from very different walks of life and very different issues, but they've had such an impact, and I have not heard enough from them about how much it can change their lives, and how it is the thing that is keeping their lives on track. It is a thing that is making them be better people. It is a thing that is helping them be more successful. It's helping them achieve all the things they want to achieve. So I think it's a very important thing, a very valuable thing. And, we're talking about it in the context of men right now, but there are, of course, ones for women, and there's also ways to get this type of support, that isn't tied to gender at all. But I just want to make sure that we highlight that. So we'll share a link for that whenever we do have that discussion, and perhaps maybe we'll see Justin as part of that discussion as well. But with that, Justin, why don't you give us some of your wrap up thoughts?
Yeah, and just to real quick touch on the last point, there's a lot of flavors to that too, right? So it's just like going to Baskin Robbins, you're going to be able to look and see, like, do I want the really crazy intense flavor that's going to be like, they're going to tell me what to do? Or do I just want the flavor that's like going to listen to my problems and they're going to be there like, okay, we're going to support you no matter what. So just always knowing too that, like therapy, that if you get into the wrong team or it's not helping you, to continue to seek something
And at the end of the
different.
day, like, people are people too. So even if you're within
Yep.
the right organization or whatever, like, maybe you're not vibing with those people, maybe that leader's not doing the things you want, or whatnot. And of course, you have the ability to help inspire and instantiate some change, and say, hey, why don't we do it this way? Which, based on talking with you, I know you've suggested things and added things and started to refine the way that MDI does some stuff, which is cool. So great point to people at home. Like, hey, just because the first one group or organization or whatever isn't for you, don't discount the ability of having that strong, tight community around you whose goal is to make you better. Like, I mean, tell me what's wrong with that, right? What is the downside of that? The main downside is just it's going to take a little bit of your time and energy and attention. But if you got to spend a little bit of time, energy, and attention to be a better you and to accomplish the things you want to accomplish, like, seems like a good equation for me. So yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's the greatest return on investment I've ever had in my entire life, both for my time and my money. So
Yeah, high praise. So Justin, as we're wrapping up here, what were some of the last things you'd like to add?
absolutely. So to sum kind of all this stuff up that we've been talking about for mental health, treat mental health with care and respect. And I say mental health not to just address your mental health. Those around you could be struggling with mental health issues that either you and or they could not be aware of. Uh, Treating that with respect and care. There's people that you may meet on the street that have mental health issues that you may think, oh man, that person's just having a really bad day. Yeah, because they're on a break and they're not on their meds. There's something really to be said about understanding that this is a way more pervasive issue in society these days than I think people give it credit for. So treating mental health with care and respect, and then again about your process, owning the respect and the care that you need for yourself to engage with your mental health, and allowing there to be some humility there. Be humble and know that you're going to grow and you're going to change as a human being. And sometimes that may look like owning something that is a little difficult to own at the time, but very likely will help you continue down the path to success that you seek in your life. And then no disrespect towards any of that. And I guess to look at that in this way, there is a part of the civil rights movement right now that over the last 100+ years we've been continuing to evolve in, and things have been changing. And I think just now we're getting to a critical point where people are actually identifying the really difficult places or pain points in our society where civil rights issues are still a huge part of the conflict that goes on between individuals and the greater societal systems that we have. I think the same thing can be said about mental health. I think it's way too easy to just throw someone with a mental health issue that's undiagnosed into prison. It's way too easy to then have those people stay in those situations and keep them entrenched because they're not able to get out themselves. And I think the honesty about a lot of the systems that we have set up is that people are ashamed to access them. And there's a lot of shame in a lot of that. So I think we need to really, as a society, get to a point where we start to have movements, things like Black Lives Matter that have really started to bring forward this huge impact that a lot of, generations and generations of people are dealing with. Generations and generations of people have been dealing with mental health, and it's to me almost a grander issue. And even to look even further into that, the people that are most affected by mental health usually end up being minority groups because of the fact that they don't have access to the same mental health options that other people might, and
Or the
specifically
resources
in
or the
or
finances.
and the shame again in a lot of minority communities ends up being greater about accessing those resources. So it's a huge part of the process of understanding that there is so much that you can do. Myself, as you know, a cisgender white male, feeling like I have no place in really like a civil rights discussion, looking at this as my place, and not that I don't have the right. I mean, like I can be an ally, but I own this problem for myself, and mental health is a huge thing that I can be. You know, like a representative for, and what I would have if there were some civil rights issues that I were able to engage in directly and personally. And I just ask that then everyone else that doesn't deal with those things directly seek to be an ally and to be responsible for the change that needs to happen in society for us to all get better access and for it to be destigmatized.
Yeah, and I want to point out that I agree with most, if not everything that you said, and I think it's really important to point out that there are so many structural things that exist, some of which people are aware of, some of which people aren't, right? And one example is racism and the civil rights movement, and it's very easy to be uh, a well-off white person and be like, I don't get what they're complaining about. It's like, yeah, because you don't know all the things they go through. And like, you're like, we've come so far. We're so much better than we used to be, right? Like, what's the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's like, well, one of the things that you may not see are all of the microaggressions that happen to these people. They just go walking down the street, going into a store, like, hey, they are treated differently by some people because of stereotypes and racism. And it's not there's the Avenue Q song, everyone's a little bit racist. And again, it's not a binary thing. A lot of people don't want to be labeled as racist. It's like, well, we all do some racist things sometimes, even if we don't mean to, or we have the best of intentions. And so it's just worth recognizing. And one thing that I've heard a lot from people of color is that, hey, we want you to acknowledge the fact that we are different and there is a difference, right? But we don't want it to be like a negative thing. Like, it's just like, yeah, don't like say, oh, we're all the same, we're all equal. It's like, yeah, you're black, I'm white, we're different. Like, you have a different story, you have a different things that you're dealing with. And similarly with mental health, it's like you have a different story, you have different things you're dealing with, and it's not you don't want to sweep it under the rug and brush it away and say, oh, that's nothing. Like, that's what was happened in America largely in the 1900s, right? And I like to think about it kind of like civilization. Like, for those who aren't aware, like, we're in a global pandemic. Well, think back like couple hundred years. I'm not sure exactly how long. We didn't even used to know what germs were. We didn't even know they were a thing. And we used to literally poop right next to we ate. And now that sounds so gross to everybody, but that's part of us advancing as a society and advancing as a civilization. And one of the things that's been happening for a while now, but I feel like there's been a lot more awareness and change and things that have been at least been publicly made aware to the average layperson within the last couple of decades around mental health. A lot more awareness, a lot more discussion around it, especially, actually coincidentally that with the pandemic, rising up the awareness
Mm-hmm.
of things like depression and the downsides when people are isolated from other humans, since we're social creatures and beings. Even if you're an introvert, there's value in you going to work besides just being there to, do the job, right? That's the thing I hear all the time is like, oh, well, there's no point in me ever going back. Like, I don't get anything out of it. And I was like, you get a lot of things that you don't realize you get out of. And that's one of the things here at What the Hell is Water, like the name, for those who are like, don't know what the name is, it's talking about the little parable where there's a couple fish swimming in the ocean, and then another fish comes by and says, hey, how's the water today? And the two fish look at each other and say, what the hell is water? Because they've been in this water, it's all around them all the time, so much so they didn't even realize it was there. Kind of like us as humans, like, oh, the air around us is stuff we breathe, but you don't really think about it because it's always there. And so there's all these things in society and these structures that have been made up and these systemic issues that can lead to a lot of things and a lot of problems. And for example, with military, there's a term, military brat. And when you say that to somebody, you can know, like, hey, all right, this person had to deal with a bunch of these things. They probably may have some side effects or issues because of all the things that they dealt with. And it's actually so well known, right? That term has so much weight with it. And hopefully the military is doing more to help address these things. But one thing to point out is it's so easy to be like, oh, they should do something. The man's got us down or whatever. But it's also easy to forget who is the man? Who are these giant things? At the end of the day, it's just a bunch of people. And so when you're trying to make some type of societal change, there's things like movements where you're trying to inspire people. You're trying to inspire individuals to make that change to where they can go to wherever they can influence and inspire that greater change with a larger group of people. And that's how large societal changes happen. So just a little bit of response for you there, Justin.
Yeah, I would agree. But again, the only thing that you can do is be the change, right, that you wish to see in the world. So huge process for me. I am on it every day, but honestly, I feel empowered more and more every step that I take.
Well, one other thing that I wanted to share in the chat is another episode we had that's related to mental health, and that was when we had a guest named Known Wells. It was episode 7, and he has a podcast he calls You, Me, Empathy, which is a lovely podcast where you can learn a lot more about what some of the challenges people may go through. Kind of like we sat here and we talked with Justin. He talked through some of the issues that he had and some of the symptoms he felt and how that affected his life. Known has a podcast that does all of these things. And so if you're vibing with this and you're like, you want to learn a little bit more, maybe you see a little bit more about other disorders, things like that. Or if you're like, I don't get this, I don't understand this at all. Like, that is a great way to start. Like, hey, why don't you just go listen to some stories of other people and see what they've gone through in their life and see some of the issues that they came up with and also what do some of these even things mean? Like, we hear these words like anxiety, depression, there's bipolar, there's all of these things, just straight up anger issues. These are all things that people experience, and by hearing the stories of some people who've been affected by that and potentially have made some change and awareness and acceptance, you can learn a lot. So I encourage you guys to check out that podcast. I'm sorry, that episode. It was episode 7. We've shared that in the chat. And then also you can check out Known's podcast, You, Me, Empathy. So those are a couple other things for you. Well, Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This was a great discussion. And unfortunately, Ryder had an emergency he had to go take care of. So sorry he wasn't able to join us for the latter half of the discussion. But look forward to potentially having you involved in some other future discussions. And we really appreciate you sharing and being so open and vulnerable with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure to be on the show. And, I don't think I have an answer to what the hell is water, but hopefully other people are at least more aware of the fact that there are these things going on around them that they can be a part of.
Yes, and normally I kind of have a little bit of back and forth with Ryder to end the show, but since you're here, I'm going to ask you, every show, we like to give it one challenge to our listeners at home and say, hey, here's one small step you can take today to make your life better. Usually it's related to the topic at hand. So when it comes to any of the things we're talking about, but I would say mental health, dealing with past traumas, any of these things, is there something that comes to mind for you as one easy step that someone could take?
Yeah, just something that's been helping me a lot lately, and I touched on it earlier, but meditation, and I guess more specifically body scanning. Not to get like super deep into anything, but just to really sit with yourself and again, your sober self. Don't sit there and have a glass of wine and then go try to do this because it's not going to be the same experience. Sit with yourself for, greater than a minute. And I like to just really, put my hand on my heart and on my chest and feel my breath. And as you breathe, just feel the sensations in your body and check in, like, where is there tension? Where is there something going on? And see if you can like let it go. And as that happens, are there emotions that come up? Is there anything there for you? That's some really deep stuff. I mean, I'm not saying this is easy. That's the part where you have to really be in tune kind of with yourself. And if you've never done that process, it'll take a lot of work to be like immediately identifying, oh yeah, that's my anxiety bubbling up in my chest, for example. I've only really been doing this on a regular basis for probably about a year now, but doing that process is what's allowed me to stay in touch with what exactly happened. So even if you just start the process with taking a second and taking a minute and just sitting and doing a meditation and checking in with yourself in your mind, okay, how do I feel? Am I able to breathe? Am I calm? And then retest, like, how did I feel before? And then how do I feel after? I think that's the biggest thing that I would make a challenge to do. 1 week of
Yeah.
full meditation and see how you feel.
Yeah. and I think that's a great thing. So real quick, the concept of kind of paying attention to certain parts of your body, that was called body scanning. Is that what you said?
Body scanning, correct?
Yeah, for
Yes.
those people who want to look that up, body scanning, you can look that up to learn a little bit more. But yeah,
Please, please be careful when you Google that. I don't know what's gonna
Google
come up.
images at work, full screen.
Safe search off.
Safe search off. Yes. But well, thank you so much again for joining us, Justin. And with that, have a wonderful day, and we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate
Bye.
it.
Well, oh man, so that was a great discussion, and it was so nice to hear from somebody's personal life. Like, hey, here's the things that have happened to me in my life. Here's some of the things that have shaped who I am today. But how can I actively recognize the things that are happening and have created me who I am without blaming the past, and so recognizing the past, but owning it myself. And then also one of the things Justin said in there was, I believe it was a quote by Buddha. I could be wrong about that, but it was something about, hey, when he was starting to have some suicidal ideation, one of the phrases he heard was, hey, it's not me wanting my total self to be dead. It's just me recognizing that this certain part of myself needs to die. And I may have butchered that a little bit, so make sure to go hear his exact wording on that. But real quick, just for the recap for today. So as we were talking about Justin's life, we started by talking about his military upbringing and what it was like to be moving around all the time, and also have in this case, it was his father who was doing stuff for the military, often secret things. Often he'd have to go away, and that led to time that he was away from the family. And so that led to Justin having to be the man in some ways, and to step up and do certain things. And then that led to some issues and things like that. And so on top of that, when Justin was a teenager, his brother died. And his brother died in an accident when they were only a few years apart, and that was one of his best friends. And having a sudden death that came out of nowhere is very hard. And so he talked about how that impacted him, and how that affects him even to this day, and some of the therapy and the things that he's done to help deal with that and to help process that. Then we talked about when he got into college, and that was when he first realized, hey, now that I'm doing this engineering stuff, I mean, up until now, I've been really good at doing all of this school stuff, and I've not had really any issues, and I've got good grades. But when he got into college in his first semester, his GPA was not great, and he realized he was talking some with one of his friends that, hey, this person is telling me about their issues with ADHD, and that sounds a lot like the things that I'm thinking, a lot of things that I'm feeling. And so he went and got that checked out, and then he got that addressed, and he talked about how that affected his grades, affected his productivity, affected everything. And so that was a great step for him. But he also cautioned and said, hey, that actually my response then was, I go to a place, there was no test. They basically said, all right, sounds good. Here, have the drug, which leads to some of the systemic issues that we've talked about around mental health, and using prescription drugs and treatment of them, and making sure to consider the whole treatment, right? And drugs is just one path, and it's just one thing you can do. And so making sure that you're dealing with the other aspects, you're getting the counseling aspect, you're talking things through, and you're trying to get to that root cause is something that Justin realized, and we talked about, is like, hey, that's something that's very important. And one downside of potentially starting with the drug is that your first treatment is that maybe that becomes something that then you become dependent on and you have for the rest of your life. And not that there's anything wrong with that. There's certainly many cases where that's perfectly fine. But there's also some people who is like, hey, I want to try and own this and do this without the drug. Or maybe I start with the drug and then I wean off. Or maybe I start without the drug and then I realize I need the drug. Or maybe it's based on time. There's a whole bunch of different situations. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not here to give you advice. Those things you should talk through with them. But the main point is to focus on the whole solution and look at all of the problems and recognize that medicine and drugs are just one way to treat those things. So then we talked about how he transitioned out of college, went and lived out in California, had started to discover and really dive into a little bit more of his love of the outdoors and hiking and backpacking and things like that, but also having a marriage and then eventually that transitioned into him then that marriage ending and him going to Denver and going to live his new life, and he's starting to dive into a whole bunch more of the skiing and the backpacking and the camping and things like that, the things that are very important to him. And he also referenced how, just like we talked about in previous episodes, how nature can be a very healing thing. It can help you be with yourself. Justin mentioned meditation. Nature is a great place to do these things, help you be connected to the larger world and appreciate things and slow down a little bit and get away from all of the dings and the phone calls and whatnot that can happen throughout the day. So we also talked briefly about something called MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And that's the concept of, hey, maybe some of these psychoactive drugs like psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, as some people would call it, or LSD or acid, like, can these be used in ways as therapy tools to help people do things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise? Because of the way those drugs work, they allow these people to process things, to talk through things that they would not otherwise. And so MAPS is an organization that is supporting that and is trying to further that science, because they can be very valuable things and they can be a great tool. We also mentioned one other type of therapy that was very impactful for Justin, which was EMDR. And it was a therapy that has to do with eye movement. And basically, there's some exercises that they have you do. And with Justin, he described it as having basically an IMAX movie of his life was shown to him as this was going on. And it was this thing that allowed him to process a lot of the stuff that had been going on and allowed him to really think and feel all of that through. So a lot of really good stuff in there. We also talked a little bit about depression, and then we talked a little bit about the men's team. The idea of a men's team, the one that Justin got involved in, is one called MDI, which we've linked in the chat. Mentored. I'm not going to be able to remember the acronym off the top of my head. Sorry, but you can find that in the chat. But we talked about the importance of that and how that's establishing a strong community around yourself. And we tied that into some of our discussions with Eric Wooten, one of our relationship experts, and the 3 pillars that he shares, community, personal responsibility, and intentionality. And a men's team is a great way to do those types of things. And as we mentioned earlier in the episode, we will probably have a separate episode or at least segment in the future talking about just that. And which leads us to our challenge. So our challenge for the day from Justin was to do a little bit of meditation. And he challenged you guys to try meditating for a week and see what difference that makes. And I really encourage you guys to take him up on that challenge. Now, for some of you who've never done this before, I know that might be a little intimidating. So I think the first step is to just start and do it. And one of the things that he mentioned was doing a technique called body scanning, which is where you pay attention to different parts of your body and see, like, okay, what am I feeling? And then maybe some steps that happen a little later is you realize, like, hey, okay, that feeling is tied to a certain something. He mentioned, for example, oh, my chest is tight. That might be because I'm anxious right now. So if that is something that sounds useful to you guys, try some body scanning out. And he noticed, he said just 1 minute. It doesn't have to be a really long time, but there's something to be said about just getting yourself in that state of mind, getting in just with yourself and listening and focusing and doing that technique. And so I would encourage you guys to try that out. And whether it's the meditation, whether it's the body scanning, or both. So that is our challenge. And you know what? I know one of the things you're probably thinking is like, Reed, when am I going to do this? I don't have the time to do that. Well, that's the beauty of our episodes, is at the end of every one of our episodes, we play 20 minutes of music. And that's to give you guys the time and space to maybe do one of these challenges, maybe take the next steps. And it can also be a time for you just to think about and reflect what we talked about and see how that ties to you and things like that. And of course, if any of this stuff is really resonating to you and you think it's valuable, or if you know somebody in your life who could maybe benefit from this, or maybe you were reminded of as you're listening to all of this, perhaps you want to send them this episode or send them part of this episode. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Happy Tuesday, and I'm going to go ahead and play that music here in a second. And if you're like, well, Reed, I don't have that extra time right now. Well, set a reminder on your phone. Say, hey, Smeary, or Alexa, or, okay, Stoogle. I'm not avoiding the exact words so I don't trigger them for you guys. But you say, hey, smart assistant, remind me when I get home to meditate, or remind me at 1 p.m. Whenever that time is going to be for you. You're important. Take care of yourself before you take care of others. So with that, have a great day.